like to say a very warm welcome to everybody this afternoon. It's great to see you. Welcome to our edition of the People Hub. For those of you that have been before, the idea is to bring sort of HR professionals and business owners, managers, leaders together in a community where we can share some best practice. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the things that have happened recently, some questions that have been posed to both Lauren and I over the last week. But please, if something that you really want to talk about today and we've not touched upon, you can pop it in the chat. We will cover it for you today. Equally, if there are other things that you'd like to hear about in the future, so within the series of the People Hub, if there's a presenter you'd like us to invite or anything that is of interest to you, let us know, because we're very keen, obviously, to make this as interesting and informative as possible for you. So I'm joined with Lauren today, who I'm sure a lot of you will know, our HR consultant, to a very experienced, got a lot of knowledge, and obviously has got a lot of insight of what's been going on recently. We've got Dan, who's going to pose the questions, and Lauren and I are just going to sort of bit of a panel type discussion on some of the questions that have been posed recently. So don't forget to add your questions to the chat, and hopefully you'll enjoy the session. So I'm going to hand over to Dan now.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, we've got a few questions that have been sent across in advance, so I'm just going to pose these to Lauren and yourself. So starting off, I've got a question just for Lauren to kick things off. So we've seen a significant spike in redundancies during the last 6 months, which is expected to increase again as the current about to consider redundancy. How should they approach this process?
So obviously, redundancy is naturally a very difficult process for everybody involved. I understand that it's not just obviously the people who are subject to potential redundancy that it's difficult for. It's difficult for the person conducting the redundancy, that whether that be the managers, the business owners, and obviously the other staff who may not be put at risk, but obviously their colleagues potentially within the redundancy selection. I think the key thing I would say would be to communicate effectively, because what I've tended to found is that we'll have people who may feel that they haven't really had all the information given to them. So for example, the business case, what the process will be. That's when a lot of employees start to get quite disgruntled. The process then can sort of go different ways, because people may end up going off sick because they feel like they're getting stressed at work. So communication and making sure that you're transparent really is really key. I think one thing that I've found is a lot of employers don't think about the transparency. So whilst they have no real reason to hold back the actual business case, such as the figures and the reasons why they've ended up in that position, they often don't really think to communicate it. But that's actually really important, because while you as a business owner understand everything that's going on in the background, your staff may not. So I think that's a really key point, because obviously developing their understanding of the situation that you're in helps them to digest that information a little bit better, and the process often runs a lot more smoother really. I think what I would say is making sure that anybody who is the decision maker is involved is helpful, because sometimes it may be that managers are taken out of the equation, and either directors or someone more senior are drafted in to manage that process, and sometimes that can feel a little bit impersonal, I think, from an employee perspective. So I'd definitely say involvement in the decision-making process should feed through to the obviously actual process as well.
Excellent. Vic, is there anything that you'd like to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think just to echo sort of Lauren's points, but a big concern that we've got at the moment is that obviously a lot of businesses are having to make survival decisions right now, and if we acknowledge it's incredibly tough out there, and normally when you are sort of considering redundancy, there is more of a strategy to that redundancy process. More sort of thought is given to that and the consideration. So a big concern for us at the moment is that maybe our clients, employers are not spending the time that they would normally do. So they're sort of circumnavigating some of the process, which you can't do. Employment tribunal statistics are going up very significantly at the moment. If you think about it, there's a lot of people out there who have been made unemployed, and they're not necessarily going into another job as quickly as they would normally. So they've got nothing to lose by submitting a claim. So I think, from Lauren and I's perspective, and obviously all of the team at High Performance, we really want to ensure that our clients are following the right process. I would sort of make the suggestion that you do consider the fact that you are having to do quite a lot of this via sort of Zoom, Teams. It's very impersonable, so it may be that you want to extend the consultation period a little bit longer, and consider the people that are left within the business as well. There's a lot of uncertainty out there already. We only have to sort of turn on the news to become all quite anxious. And for employees, if other people are being made redundant, it's obviously horrendous for the people that are being made redundant, but the people that stay need to be considered as well. And just from our experience at the moment, we're finding that people maybe aren't considering those people. And what you don't want is just presenteeism. You want your workforce to be engaged, and you want your workforce to be productive. Part of that is that element of that psychology, of trust. People need to feel that they are safe and secure in their roles. So just some reassurance and good communication during the process, I'd just advise as well.
Okay, excellent. So this is a question for yourself, Vic. So it was Mental Health Awareness Day last Saturday, and there's been a lot of concerns in the media regarding employee wellbeing, particularly in areas now where gyms have been closed. Do you have any advice to employers on what they should be considering?
Thanks, Dan. Well, I'm sure, like many of you, I was devastated having, living in Liverpool, that our gyms have closed, because that was something that I would spend quite a lot of time in the gym. It was great for me. It helped me just to maintain my routine and keep my stress levels low. But I think, obviously we've had Mental Health Awareness Day week. It does sort of put mental health in the spotlight where it should be. There is massive concerns at the moment that people are they've been working from home, then we've gone from working from home to being sort of encouraged to come back into the workplace. Some people have been quite concerned about that, some people haven't. It obviously depends on the individual. And then now there's that sort of guidance to be back at home again. What we do know is that this isn't temporary. This is potentially 12 months, maybe longer than 12 months. This is a change that I think, as employers and sort of leaders of businesses, we have to consider. We have to consider our people. We all have mental health, and everybody has individual differences and vulnerabilities as well. So a lot of our advice at the moment to clients has been, again, about, as I talked about before, good communication. I think it's really important to communicate to your people, particularly if you are all working remotely. And we do have, great ability now through technology to be able to communicate. Got lots of clients have done some really quirky, really good things. A lot of people are doing, things like virtual coffee mornings, just that ability to be able to speak to your team, and say, are you okay? So outside of sort of business related, just checking in on people now to make sure that they're coping well. Other things as well, just in terms of activities and maybe a way to promote sort of health and well-being. I think the concern that a lot of people have got at the moment is that if we are obviously working from home, you have to be quite disciplined to try and maintain that routine. Gyms have closed in some areas now, so that sort of outlet has disappeared. And there's some great ideas out there. We've got one client that had gave everyone Fitbit, and then they had a bit of a competition, so people went out walking on their own, and then they'd have a leaderboard, a way to just sort of bring the team together. And we've had sort of virtual mindfulness sessions. There are things that you can do that are not going to cost the earth. My team, we have sort of like a wind down Friday, somebody does a quiz, just ways for us to be able to get together. And I suppose trying to find a way to have that water cooler moment as well that we're all talking about at the moment, that ability, to be able to share ideas or just check that people are okay. So, I really would say that it is about individual differences, and what will work for one person obviously will not necessarily work for others. There's been quite a lot of research recently. Some people that have had pre-existing mental health problems have found it very difficult to work at home because it may bring back some memories of a bad time within their life. On the other hand, there are people that are incredibly anxious and nervous about the idea of coming into the workplace. I think we've just got to be respectful of everybody right now. There are lots of sort of places for you to signpost employees as well. I would make that point that we are not experts and nobody is expected to be an expert. What we are responsible for is to ensure that we can signpost our people to the right places. So I think it's about us having that communication and ability to know when something's not quite right and somebody needs help, and them feeling confident to be able to speak to someone and then to signpost them into the right avenue. And there is a lot of, you may not have the budget for an EAP system. You don't need to worry about that. There are lots of other fully funded support out there, which I'll share after the meeting today. And equally, a really good website is Mind, which is the mental health charity. They do a lot of ways for you to be able to be a good mental health ambassador. Ways they have some training for mental health first aiders, for example. So you've got people in your business that can look after sort of that area of the business, and if people are struggling, they can feel that they're comfortable to go to speak to that person, and that person is equipped to know how to signpost them to the right support.
Lauren, do you have any additional points or guidance?
Yeah, I think one thing that I have been advising clients on recently is the return to work from the furlough period. So obviously we've had some clients who, for various reasons, may have had some staff off for 6 months, and obviously with the scheme winding up now, and some people maybe not taking up the winter support scheme that's on offer, those employees are coming back to work from a very long period of time off. And obviously, if you've been communicating with them throughout that period, then that's great. But obviously, you still need to just bear in mind, really, that it's still going to be quite a difficult transition to go from having such a long time off to coming back into the office, back into normal routine, commuting as normal, expecting to work. So what I would say is maybe treat that furlough period as the same way you would an absence, so a long-term absence. If you've had staff who've been off for all that time, while you may have been communicating with them throughout that period, I suppose really we may have no idea what's been going on in their personal life within that time. So just think a couple of considerations as what Vic has mentioned, just building on that really, and holding those return to work interviews when they do come back on their first day, I think is really important to allay any fears that they may have, and also give you an opportunity to ask them whether there's anything that they're concerned about, so you can address that before it becomes a bigger issue and then potentially leads to an absence issue.
Perfect. Vic, you touched on home working, home appearing to be the new knowledge, poorly performing members of their team.
Yeah, Dan, sorry, I think as the challenge with Zoom is there's sometimes internet connection, so I think we lost you a little bit there, but my understanding of your question is around working from home and some of the challenges there, and I think it links to what Laura and I have spoken about already. And as I mentioned before, we've sort of gone from working from home to encouraged to come back into the office to no, actually let's work again from home. And I am involved and chair a group of HR directors across the UK. I chair a meeting that we hold together, and it's been really useful, to be honest, of late, because it is an unprecedented time. So I think that peer review has been really helpful, and there's been a real consensus between all that, even of various size businesses, so very small to very large sorts of organisations, that working from home is probably something that will sort of stick in some way or another. So I think we've given obviously employees a lot more flexibility than in some organisations. Some of our clients, they've not allowed working from home before. They were quite uncomfortable about working from home because they had some concerns around whether people would be productive during that time. And I think a lot of employees, have demonstrated that they absolutely are, and we have got that ability through technology and good communication to be able to work effectively. But I think now more than ever, rather than this be considered a temporary measure, we do need to consider this in the longer term and how we approach that. And working from home obviously will require that management, and that I think is the big concern around a lot of people now that we're working with, that actually whilst on the whole their team are working very well, they have got people that are not performing well, which is a real sort of challenge for them. So what we need to consider in that regard is, and I think Lauren will have seen quite a lot of this as well, where we've got maybe people that are talking about maybe sort of redundancy or disciplinary for poor performance, when actually it's not being tackled very well by their manager. So I think more than ever we need to upskill our managers now, because it's a different way for them to manage. Managing somebody who sits next to you versus managing somebody that is working from home is very, very different. There are a lot of different types of distractions. You've removed some distractions, to be honest, but there are others. So I think it's very, very important now that we are very clear on our objectives. Do our people really understand what their objectives are? We need to have more meetings than we would normally. And I don't mean have meetings for meeting's sake, because that can be a frustration for people as well. But just those daily sort of check-ins. I think we do need to consider our appraisal system now. It might need to look different. This is, the likelihood is we haven't got an end date to this pandemic. We don't know how long we're going to be in this situation. So my advice is now, let's just deal with what we've got and be more proactive in the way in which we manage our people. So, we do need to look at how we run our appraisal system. And we can't drop the ball on these things either, because we have got to remember that, I mentioned earlier on, we want engaged, productive people within our business. We know already we've got lots of challenges. There's lots of noise around us. I personally have struggled quite a lot with concentration, because there's so much going on, so much uncertainty, which is difficult for everybody. But I think we need to ensure that people are clear, they are clear on sort of their career and their pathway. So not only do we need to consider our appraisal system and do we need to make some changes to that, but we also need to consider people's individual personal development. And I know that a lot of organisations and businesses have been hit by some very difficult sort of financial challenges, so they may not be able to give people the salary increase that they would like to. So there's other things that we can consider as well. There's other ways that we can invest in our people. And I don't know, Lauren, if you've got any sort of thoughts on that, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just like echoing what you say, Vic, it's really important. And I think one thing that I have noticed when advising clients on making redundancies, when we're trying to determine the selection criteria that we will use to determine who will be selected, a lot of we're finding that a lot of employers may not have managed certain processes. So for example, they may not have really managed absence very well or recorded it very well, or performance. They haven't really got any proper measures about what constitutes quality, customer service, and quantity. And then they're trying to rely on that data to select people for redundancy. So that's, again, a big risk, because we're having a lot of people now, obviously in the climate that we're in, contesting their redundancies and appealing against them and challenging them. And what we're finding is when employees find that they've scored the lowest on performance, for example, they're asking the employer for evidence of that. And a lot of the time they haven't got it, because they haven't followed haven't got any KPIs in place, they haven't followed any kind of process. And a lot of them are turning around and saying, well, my performance can't have been that bad because you haven't spoken to me about it for a year. So how are you justifying my low score? So I think, yeah, just it's really important that you have all them processes in place, because you may need to rely on that information in a year's time if unfortunately your situation doesn't improve.
Okay, I think you both may have give a bit of info relating to this next question, but Lauren, would you just be able to tell me a bit about what are the most common issues that employers are up against at the moment, and how are they handling this?
Yeah, I think the two things really for me that stand out, one are making changes to terms and conditions, and the second one would be flexible working and childcare issues. So if we start with the first one of changing terms and conditions, what a lot of businesses are finding now is, obviously since the return to the workplace, their business is looks very different now than it did pre-COVID. So a lot of people are, maybe have made some job losses, potentially don't want to make any more job losses, but recognise that something has to change, so something has to give. So they're making decisions about potentially changing the way they operate at the moment and identifying some cost savings. So a lot of people seem to be reducing employees' hours at the moment. That's a common theme that I'm seeing at the moment. So the change in people's terms and conditions. And obviously that is a very complex process to navigate through, because it involves a consultation period, and then it also involves a different process should that employee not consent to those changes. And there's quite a lot of laws in terms of the numbers that are affected will change the process again. So it's a very complex process, and what I've found is some clients are just hoping that can happen overnight, and unfortunately it can't. So if any changes are to be made to anybody's terms and conditions, it's just to be mindful really that there's a very careful process that needs to be managed with relation to that obviously we can support with. The other one being flexible working. As Vic pointed out, it's worked for a lot of businesses. It may not be working so well for other businesses for various reasons, but we also have to manage that now with the issues with the schools. So I'm having a lot of clients calling me regularly saying, I've got this employee we've just brought back to the office, but now they're saying that they have to stay at home with the children because the children have been sent home from school, which isn't ideal for the employer. But you do need to bear in mind that the right to time off for care of dependents applies to emergency situations, and our solicitors have advised us that COVID is considered an emergency situation. So while you may not have authorised 2 weeks working from home, for example, in the past, it may be that you need to be a little bit more flexible. But with that said, it's not to say that you can, every 2 weeks you need to let people just go off. You just need to really place emphasis on that individual situation. So find out what the childcare provisions are going to be, for example. So now that they're aware that this could be an issue, do they have any support with childcare? What provisions are they going to put in place? Be able to attend work. So just making sure that you're putting a lot of emphasis on an individual case and not sort of applying a blanket approach to flexible working where childcare or COVID issues are the reason for that.
So just to jump on that one, Lauren,
Yeah.
the right to time off, is that paid or unpaid?
That's unpaid, Abdul.
Unpaid, yeah.
Yeah, so typically the circumstances where that would apply would be if, for example, an employee was in work and they got a phone call to say, your child fell over or something and you need to leave and go and pick them up. You would need to allow that time off for care of dependents, but it would be unpaid. But if somebody said, well, I can't get childcare next week, that right doesn't apply. However, given that COVID is an unprecedented situation, it's sort of considered an emergency. So it's quite it's kind of on the fence of both of them scenarios, really.
Yeah.
So it's just important that you make sure that you dig into the individual circumstances surrounding that case.
Yeah. And apply it across the board. I think what we're having is, as you mentioned there, people coming back from sort of the ones we put on furlough to help with childcare coming back,
Yeah.
and the schools are just, they're dipping in and out, and it's only a matter of time. But we've just let them take the holidays. They've had enough holidays, so they've carried on. But it could be 6 months. So we just play it by ear, and you've got to have a rule of one rule fits all, is it, or do you have to do it to each case?
I would just take the circumstances of each individual case. So for example, if you have somebody who you know usually has some childcare provision in place, they would really need to explain to you why that can't continue for the time that they need off. Whereas if you have, for example, a single parent who happens to be a female and doesn't have any other childcare provisions, then you may just need to be careful with that, because there's a potential case of indirect discrimination. So I think what I would do is focus on every individual case, and where circumstances are the same or similar, you could maybe apply the same consistent approach there. But again, just make sure that any sort of difference in circumstance is considered.
Lauren, just I had a query yesterday which was interesting, and obviously I know you've got far more experience of this than I have. What's your thoughts around, we've got some people that obviously are having to self-isolate at the moment. We had one client yesterday who had a member of staff who has to self-isolate, but they perform very poorly at home, very difficult. So the question was, what does she do? Does she sort of try and force them to take some leave, or what are her options?
Yeah, I guess you can, obviously you can instruct that employees take leave as long as you give them double the amount of notice. So for example, if they say to you, oh, I'm going to be off for 14 days, then you could arguably say, okay, well, 5 of those I'd like you to take as holiday, because I've given you 10 days notice that you'd need to take the 5 days. But I think most importantly is make the expectations very clear. So when people are having to self-isolate, they need to make it very, very clear to you that they have the provision to work from home, because otherwise it would need to be unpaid leave. So if they're saying to you, well, my home circumstance doesn't dictate that I can work from home for whatever reason, then unfortunately it would just be a matter of going on to SSP. And the government have obviously extended the SSP period, the backdating, to the first day of sickness, whereas usually it's the 4th qualifying day. And also employers can reclaim that back. So if you determine that employee can't work from home because it's just they're not performing, and perhaps you've seen that before, you absolutely know that they can't perform from home, then you may just need to say, well, we're not going to permit that, and you're going to have to take sick leave.
On that, sorry, I keep interrupting. Yeah. Apologies.
Fine.
We've got a confirmed case with one of the lads who's been off since last Friday. Does he straight away go on to sick pay, or he's got
Yeah, so what happens, Abdul, is they need to be, the government making it easy as usual, they need to be off for 4 days to qualify for the SSP, but it's backdated to day 1, if that makes sense. So if somebody's off for 3 days, they wouldn't get anything because they won't qualify. But once they hit that 4th consecutive day, then they qualify, and then you can backdate the pay from day 1.
Okay, sound makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going.
Sorry. Do they just need the test certificate, the result of the test, or do they need anything other than that to confirm?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my clients are asking for proof, just because obviously there's situations where people may just think, well, I might just get a little bit of extra leave, so I'm going to say I tested positive. So yeah, that's what a lot of clients are asking, just to provide proof. I think you get an email certificate, don't you? So they could just forward that to you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks for that, Abdul. Good question. I'm sure a lot of people have got similar problems at the moment, or they certainly will have. But I think with the track and trace system now, we are going to see a lot more, so aren't we, of sort of self-isolation and how we deal with that with maybe people that are not best suited to work from home, or as you say, Lauren, their environment may not help them to be able to work from home. Back to you, Dan.
Of course. So Lauren, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the coronavirus support scheme and your opinion on its effectiveness to this point?
Yeah, it's took me a long time.
Lauren.
It took me such a long time to get my head around this. So I hope you've all got your pens out because you may need to write this down. So basically, the government are offering, with the new support scheme, it means that an employee will have to work at least 33% of their hours. So I've had some clients saying, okay, but what if they're not working those 33%? They absolutely have to, because the whole point of the winter support scheme is to ensure that only viable jobs are sustained. So if you're saying, well, I can't offer 33% because I haven't got the work coming in, then the government wouldn't see that job as a viable job. Therefore, the support is not aimed at you. The support is aimed at those who will be able to sustain some level of work, but obviously during the downturn can't fulfill all their hours. So as a minimum, you have to give your employee 33%, so a third of their hours they must work per week. The other 67% that remains of that, the government will pay 1/3 of that 67%. You have to pay the other third of that 67%. So the employee ends up in the end with a total of 77% as a minimum, and you as the employer will pay 55% in total. So I think a lot of people, including myself, were confused at the start because it was sort of advertised in a way that you pay a third, the employee works a third, and the government pay the other third. Then that would result in the employee getting 100% of their wages, but they don't. So you only pay a third, they work a third, and you pay a third of the remainder 67%. We do have a bit of a table that I can send over to anybody that needs it. If, for example, they're not working 33% of their hours, they're potentially working 50% of their hours, so you need that calculation. I can send that over to you, but I think it's just important that you understand that calculation first. And then in terms of its effectiveness, to be honest, I haven't had that many clients uptake this support scheme, because when they figure it out, a lot of them are sort of reaching the conclusion, well, we've got such a downturn of business, which is why our employees have been on furlough leave since March. We haven't got them 10 hours a week or whatever to give, and we certainly haven't got any money to give for the hours not worked. So in terms of its effectiveness, you know, I think it will help a very marginal number of people in terms of who would be able to manage that, because I think a lot of people are in the position either we've got the work or we haven't, and they're certainly not in a position to be able to pay for work not done, which is obviously an obligation of the scheme.
No, I think that
Vic, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, just to mirror what Lauren said, I think from what people that I've spoken to, they just don't really feel that it's going to support them. And I think, you know, coupled with now businesses being forced to close, or, you know, hospitality not being able to work as they would normally, gyms being closed, you know, casinos and you know, various sorts of businesses not only have got downturn, but some are actually not allowed to open. So I think yeah, it's, for us, you know, we obviously do forecast there'll be a lot more redundancies, because I think it's made people think, well, they've got to make that decision, because, you know, furlough has just delayed a lot of redundancies, you know, just kept people in employment for that little bit longer, just to try and morally help them. But you know, ultimately people are back in force now to make some very tough decisions, and we obviously advise a lot of clients of late on the redundancy process.
Okay, excellent. So I think this is the last question that we had sent in ahead of the webinar, but are there any good initiatives that can support the business and workforce moving forward, Vic?
I think there's a common theme at the moment, isn't there? Obviously, we're
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, no, there's a common theme.
Yeah, apologies. There's a bit drop.
It's okay, Dan. Don't worry, we can hear you. And there's a common theme for businesses at the moment. You know, obviously, and when we talk about a level of recovery, you know, we've got to survive. We've got to come out of this stronger than we've ever been before. So when we've talked today, you know, the big theme has been around sort of communication and adapting to this new way of working that, is not what we all hoped to be sort of temporary. It's pretty permanent at this moment in time. 12 months is a long time. So we do really need to consider, I always say this, obviously I'm in a people business, so it really frustrates me when companies don't look after their people. It's probably the most expensive, biggest resource that you've got. You get your people sort of happy, and your business, will obviously flourish. That's still important. That still matters. And my concern at the moment is that people have totally disregarded engagements. That they're not interested in sort of the development of their people anymore. The amount of sort of companies that I've spoken to they're not bothering doing their sort of their employee survey this year. They haven't done their appraisals. Personal development is sort of they forgot about it. We just need to refocus. I think as a sort of business community, we need to refocus on our people again, and look at pick back up these processes. Pick back up your appraisal system. If you haven't got the budget anymore for personal development the way you would normally, think outside the box. There's loads of ways in which we can develop our people, whether that's just coaching and support or mentoring in-house. There's lots of free content out there at the moment, giving people the time and encouragement maybe to go on some free training, and then just looking at maybe some incentives in-house, that don't have to cost the earth. So, rewarding people through maybe like a reward type system. One of the things that we do as a business is we have a star, as I'm sure a lot of our clients you've seen before. We encourage you to give stars to our sort of good performing employees, and they're all sort of linked back to our values, just to remind people about the values of our business. And then once a quarter, one of our team is awarded that star of the quarter, and that's important. That recognition is important. It's always been important, but it's very important now. People just need to be reminded that they're doing a good job, because I think what I'm seeing right now is that a lot of employers are just telling people when they're not doing a good job, because obviously they're under their own pressure. And I totally get that. I'm a business owner as well. I understand. And I was on a call yesterday that was around sort of people talking around mental health, and there's a lot of business owners on that call saying that they're under a lot of pressure as well. So, I would say, we do need to look after ourselves as well. We are trying to lead our people through a very difficult time, and we need to ensure that we look after our mental well-being as well. Another point that I just mentioned would be around financial well-being. Obviously, people are, through what Lauren's talked about today, this sort of job support scheme, having maybe to reduce people's hours, changes in people's sort of personal finances, potentially their partner has lost their job, or things have changed for them. Financial well-being has always been something that's been a topic within HR. It's useful to consider. There's lots of organizations out there that will happily do free sessions for your people around good financial well-being. It's a big concern for a lot of people right now. So again, something that I'd maybe encourage people to have a look at. There are lots of ways that we can support each other during this period of time. I think there's lots of ways that we can, obviously without it costing money, be able to support our people. I'll let Lauren add a couple of things in there, because I'm stealing everything.
I think, I would just echo what you said, Vic, about making sure that people are engaged, because I think what I've found is a lot of clients started the year with great initiatives that they were going to achieve, the direction the business was going. They have, great CPD plans for people, and then we've reached a point where obviously the world just got thrown into chaos, and people are obviously just recovering from that. However, for some people who may have worked throughout the whole time, everything may have sort of continued as normal for them, or they may have been working even additional hours during the furlough period if they were still in work. So I think we're finding a lot of people who have said, well, I was promised this, I was promised that, I was hoping I was going to carry on with my appraisal, I was hoping I was going to get promoted to this new position. And while the business may change, and I think a lot of people are a bit nervous at the moment about potentially giving pay rises or spending any money, because we're also uncertain about the future. I think it's just important that you be transparent with people if that is the case. So meet with them and say, you know, obviously we had these plans for you. We would love them to continue. However, at the moment, for, you know, to ensure we sustain everybody's employment, we're going to have to hold off. And just being honest with people, because I think as soon as people start feeling like you've just forgotten about that, then they may start to disengage. And then you may have the performance or the absence issues as a fallout from that. So I think being a bit proactive and managing that. And as Vic said, you know, we're dealing with a lot of people now whose household incomes is potentially halved overnight. Bear in mind, you know, not everybody will have received generous redundancy payouts if they haven't had the service needed to qualify for that. So there could be situations where people have been financially stable and then all of a sudden, you know, their partner or whoever they live with has lost half of their income overnight. So people will have their own stresses at the moment. So I think it's just about being proactive. And if you do notice anybody who's feeling or even having some performance issues, just get to the bottom of them rather than letting them escalate and then trying to tackle them. Just have those open and honest conversations, I would say, and see what is affecting people and why their performance may be impacted. You may even get some people who aren't performing to the best that they could be because they think that they're on a sinking ship, and they think, well, the business hasn't communicated to me about why, you know, where we're going, whether we're safe, whether we're not. So what's the point? So I think it's just all those considerations, and I would say just be as proactive as possible, really.
I think that's a really good point. And you know, I think a lot of organisations have shied away from just being honest, you know, and maybe again, we, you know, talk about hospitality. Literally overnight they lost all of that footfall, and it's being honest with your people and, you know, explaining to them, well, okay, this is what's happened, but this is our plan, this is our recovery, this is what we intend to do. Because people they become disengaged, don't they? They think, well, I'm not going to be here for much longer. They've got that level of uncertainty. You know, you go back to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic needs that people have got to have. And if they haven't got that, and you haven't got that psychological contract, then, you know, you are going to have people that presenteeism. People aren't necessarily going to leave your business right now because they can't leave to go somewhere else. That's not always a good thing either, because if people don't really want to be there, then that can be quite difficult. So I know that Abdul has asked a question just around some tips on appraisals for this year. So I think Lauren and I are both very much in agreement here that they absolutely must go ahead. A lot of organisations have completely forgot about them. Potentially what's happened as well is that maybe objectives that were set at the beginning of the year have either been forgotten about or you've had to change quite significantly. You know, we've got a lot of clients that have had to really think outside the box, you know, really change the business that they operate in to survive. So I suppose what you've got to consider now is when you are reviewing sort of previous objectives, are they actually the correct objectives? You know, do you need to make those changes now moving forwards? And can you really assess somebody on sort of the last 12 months if actually you haven't given them the opportunity? If they've been furloughed for the majority of the year, it's going to be very difficult to run that assessment. But just to have that meeting, you know, we normally give sort of, our advice would be to have sort of your meeting like once a year, as in sort of a good meaningful meeting where you would have you would set the objectives. Those objectives need to cascade down from the top, so you know they need to be smart objectives that have been formulated by the business, cascade down so that everybody in the business, no matter where they are within the business, whether they're sort of in a very senior, you know, sort of director position to sort of brand new, you know, an intern that's been with you for a couple of weeks, their role is important within your business, and they need to understand what it is, you know, what part of what cog are they within that sort of machine, and how they will help. Their objectives, obviously, another just a piece of advice would be not to give people too many objectives. It's got to be achievable. So, you know, sort of 4 to 5 objectives for that year is probably a reasonable amount. Again, sort of making sure that they are smart as well, so they, you know, you can measure those objectives, they are time bound, they are achievable, making sure that, you know, you have some tangible sort of element to those objectives. And then it's about checking in with that person. So one of the things that we do in our business is we sort of will have kits, so we call it Keep in Touch, and we'll do them normally sort of every couple of months, because I know I am conscious as well that you don't want to do things for, meetings for meetings' sake. And I know a lot of managers will say, I just haven't got the time. They might have a big team, and if they've got 10 people in their team, that's 10 hours a month potentially that they've got to spend sort of on this, and they just haven't got the time to do so. So consider your business and the time that you've got to invest, and just make it sort of so you can actually complete. So if it is every couple of months and it is for 40 minutes or so, then that's better than doing nothing, which what a lot of people tend to do if they shy away from the process. And then when we have our kits, what we do is we call it our business plan. We bring our business plan out to that meeting. So that obviously meeting, the kit tends to be about sort of what we call like real life. So what's going on right now in the here and now. So you can imagine for our operations team, those kits have involved a lot of conversations around furlough, the current coronavirus support scheme and what Boris thinks today. But, joking aside, we do obviously look at that business plan, have a look at the objectives and ensure that we can actually, are we on track for those objectives? Are they no longer relevant to the business? And if that's the case, we need to change them. But they're always a live document. And I think that's where people make the mistake. They hold the appraisal at the beginning of the year. They put it away somewhere. So for those of you that are on the call, and I see there are sort of some 1HR clients on the call, I'd use that element, that feature within the software. So it's a live document all the time. People are looking at, they know what their objectives are. They're clear on sort of what they need to achieve in that year. And then throughout the year, you're having that conversation. And then there's no surprises by the end of the year. So if I walk into sort of my annual appraisal with one of my team, and they know, because we've talked throughout the year, that they've not hit their objectives, there's no reason why they shouldn't have hit their objectives. They're not going to be expecting a pay rise from me. So it's really clear. It stops that awkward conversation. But then equally, if somebody's been there and they've smashed out the box all of their objectives, perform really well, then we know and we're prepared in that meeting for any sort of reward that is required. Just to finish on that as well, I would sort of ensure that it's not just all business orientated. You do need to have that personal development plan as well, and that's something. And I put my hands up here. I've mentioned this to our team now, that I feel that we fell sort of behind a little bit on our personal development plans. It's something that we are looking at now again, and making sure that we can deliver on some of those sorts of mutual promises that we've made to one another. So I think and we do get people to sort of come out with all kinds of things. I really do encourage my team. I'll encourage them to put anything on there, whether that's their aspirations to buy a house, a bigger car, spend more time with their family, whatever those personal sort of what's personal to them, what matters to them, needs to go on there as well, because I think that's important. We spend a lot of time in work, but we do need to achieve obviously our personal ambitions as well. And Lauren, have you got anything to add to that?
No, just echoing what you say, Vic, and making sure that those, like you say, it's a live document, because I think a lot of people, if they've started their appraisals in January, put them in a cupboard, and then they come to look at them next January, I think everybody's going to get a bit of a shock, aren't they? Because if they haven't managed that, and maybe it may be that you get mid-year and you have to adjust the direction of those objectives. But what you don't want to do is turn up at January and say, we haven't achieved all of these objectives because of furlough, or because the business has changed, or because that's no longer relevant. And then that meeting becomes sort of a bit of a pointless meeting. And then you're just setting the next one for the following year. I think keeping updated with that is really important. And obviously using One HR so that it's visible to everybody is a really good tool.
Is there anything else from you, Lauren? I'm conscious of time now, but just in terms of maybe that we've not covered in terms of some of the questions, or just a general conclusion that you've got from your experience right now of our situation and what we need to do moving forward?
Yeah, I think, the one thing that I will say as came through for me is really important is transparency. So I think I am seeing a lot of business owners who are very nervous about sharing figures or sharing the situation. And what I have had in some situations where we've had to make some really difficult decisions about changes to terms and conditions. And I've just said to the client, just show them the figures, just be honest and say, we have not got any money. This is why we're doing it. This is where we need to be to get where we in a sustainable position. But then once we recover it, we've got plans for the future. And that's really helped with the process. I also have another client who hasn't really done the communication very well since returning from furlough, has made some job losses, and now he's getting quite a lot of voluntary leavers. So a lot of the talent is going because he's sort of been neither here or there in terms of an update on the company. So people are just seeing people leave, whereas actually in the background he's saying to me, no, we're doing well, we just needed to cut a few things back that wasn't needed, but the work's picking up or whatever. Not really communicating that very well. So people are actually leaving because obviously some sectors are actually recruiting at the moment and doing quite well. So they're getting a lot of people who are just exiting because they just don't know where they stand really. And then obviously once they're gone, they're gone. So yeah, I think those two things for me, really transparency just throughout this whole process, whatever process it be that you're following, and keeping people updated and communicating effectively. I couldn't stress the importance of that really.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Lauren. Thanks so much for answering the coronavirus support. Well, I hope everyone's found that useful. If there are any questions that you do think of afterwards, then please do not hesitate to contact us. If you're not a client, our details will pop in the box here. And obviously for the video, if you contact www.highperformanceconsultancy.com, I'm more than happy to give anybody any advice. And if there are any other things, any other topics that you'd like us to cover over the next few months, do let us know. We really do want to grow this community and help as many people as we possibly can during this time. But thanks again for joining us today. I think if we all stick together, and share best practice, we will get through this together and we'll come out this even stronger. So yeah, thank you so much. I'll see you all soon.
Bye everyone.
Cheers, bye.
Yeah, exactly.